Hello there, and welcome to Crying Out Loud, the podcast that will make you laugh, cry, and reconsider all of your cloud security fears. I'm Eden from the CTO office at Wiz, and I'm here with my co-host, Amitai, the attack vector intel lead at Wiz.
Hello.
And today we have a very special guest, our very own Wiz Co-Founder and CTO, Ami Luttwak.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I understand I'm the first guest star of the podcast, so I hope you'll see I'm doing a good job.
And we'll decide to get more guests.
Yeah.
Or we'll invite you back if you're good enough. Amitai and I have the pleasure to learn from Ami and his depth of brilliance every day. And so we are very excited that he is here. But even more so, I'm very excited because as of late, Ami has been laughing at my jokes.
It's only when the camera is on.
Yeah. So hopefully he'll laugh today. It would make things easier. So we're excited to have you here to help us keep our listeners up to date on the latest news and trends in cloud security.
Here we go.
Let's do it. Before we jump in, what are our 4 stories for today, Amitai?
All right, so our first story, and our main story, and our most important story, is on BingBang, which is a misconfiguration that Wiz Research discovered in the Bing search engine.
Which, most importantly, almost let us self-promote the podcast on Bing as the top search result. But instead, we replaced the movie Dune with the movie Hackers.
Yes. So our second topic is a North Korean supply chain attack on a company called 3CX, which was ultimately targeting crypto companies. So the third topic for today is on a cloud destruction operation attributed to Iranian intelligence that also made the news recently. And our last topic for today is going to be on a vulnerability called QueueJumper, which was a Windows vulnerability that was disclosed last Patch Tuesday.
And when I asked ChatGPT about QueueJumper, it came up with this joke. It said, "Why did the hacker cross the road?"
Why?
To exploit the MSMQ vulnerability on the other side. Apparently ChatGPT has a good sense of humor. Look.
Yeah, better than yours.
Whoa.
ChatGPT has been making Ami laugh since its inception. There's no transition period.
I have not. All right, let's get started. Ami, the Big Bang. We want to jump into it. We want to get the behind-the-scenes intel on what went down and what people should know.
Okay. So BingBang is a major vulnerability Wiz Research found in the Bing service. Basically, it allowed us to change search results and even access potentially millions of emails and any other documents in Office 365. And it all started from a simple developer mistake that could have caused devastating impact.
So what was the mistake and what were you able to do with it?
So basically, Bing is a search engine, maybe one of the most influential websites on the internet. As a search engine, they also want to add some content. So they created a really cool service called Bing Trivia. It's apparently you can answer questions on Bing and you can collect points and get actual prizes. It started a few years ago, but how did they actually create Bing Trivia? They have an internal portal for the team to add trivia questions. This portal was misconfigured. We were able to access the portal that allows that team to add content to Bing. Now, this portal started from trivia, but if you log into it now, there's a lot of different use cases the team can do. So basically, we found a portal that allowed us to log in with any user, and we found out that if we put some information there, it actually impacts the results, the search results of Bing, right? And initially we couldn't believe that, so we actually tried it out, and we changed search results. And we said, oh my God, that's like completely crazy. We stumbled upon a website that allows anyone to log in, but it's not just a regular website. It actually controls search results on Bing. So this is not a very complicated hack. No code. We just logged in, and we were in.
And So how did you find this in the first place? Like, I'm assuming you didn't search Bing for how can I hack Bing? Right?
So we asked ChatGPT, and it told us what to do. So basically, we look for cloud vulnerabilities. So we were looking into a service called the Azure App Services. And when we were basically doing some reconnaissance on all of the Azure App Services, we stumbled upon an Azure App Service called Bing Trivia. And we said, okay, that's interesting. Let's see what this app service does. And when we tried to actually access it, we saw that it's misconfigured, and anyone can log into it. Once we were there, we actually said, okay, is this real? Is it actually plugged to production? We changed something very, very, very small, and we saw that it actually impacts search results on Bing.
Crazy.
But you also did more than that, right? Like, you didn't stop there. Like,
Of course. Because then the
How
next
could you?
question was, okay, if I can change content on Bing, can I run code? Because if you can run code on the customer browser, you can impact millions of users much, much more than just changing search results, which is also pretty crazy.
Yeah.
We saw that you can actually update not just content, but also upload XSS. You can actually upload code into the browser of the user. If I can run code on anyone logging into Bing and searching for a keyword, the impact is like you can't even understand what you can do, right? You can basically take over the browser, you can run code, and then we thought, okay, what else can we do? So apparently, if you're running code as part of Bing, you can access all of the user Office 365 information. So we showed that potentially this small dev mistake could have led an attacker to run code and access Office 365 data of all users without any logging of that from a user perspective, right?
Wait, so how did this look behind the scenes when the Wiz research team was finding this, and were you in contact with Microsoft, and how did the disclosure of this proceed?
Once we figured out this is actually Bing Trivia that impacts Bing, we immediately reported that to Microsoft, and within hours they replied to us and started taking action on it, and it was immediately fixed. We worked very closely with them, not just on the Bing issue here. It's actually a wider issue that they actually looked at, and I think that's what really is great about the research and the work for us with Microsoft that really understands that, when you find a vulnerability, if you just fix that one thing that you found, that's not great. You have to think, okay, how did it happen? And the work that we started doing, and they actually did across Azure AD, is to think, okay, what was the attack vector here? How did it happen? And how can we improve Azure AD to make it a bit stronger and harder to make this mistake?
So, like, not just protecting Microsoft's own apps, but also protecting other people who are using Azure AD in a similar way.
Yeah, I would say not just solving the problem in Bing, right? Because we found this problem in many other applications, some of them owned by Microsoft, some of them owned by other customers, right? So yeah, how do we understand the bigger problem here?
And how prevalent is this? Like, how widespread was this misconfiguration?
So what we found out is that this is all tied to Azure App Services. Azure App Services is a service in Azure that helps you create websites, just like the content portal. And there is a lot of websites created with Azure App Services. And it turns out, so we started scanning all of the Azure App Services that we can find, and we found that an amazing number, around 25% of these applications are actually allowing anyone to access them. So most security teams don't understand the details around Azure App Services, multi-tenant apps. Developers, some of them do and some of them don't. So what happens is that you create an Azure App Service. If you click the wrong checkbox, boom.
So it's like one checkbox.
One checkbox and it's done. You choose single-tenant, multi-tenant. What's better? I think multi-tenant sounds good, right? So you choose the wrong checkbox.
Single tenant sounds lonely. I want to
Yeah.
have friends.
Multi-tenant sounds
Exactly.
more
Yeah, I want more
popular,
tenants.
happy. Yeah.
Exactly.
I want users.
Now the identity team many times doesn't actually have a good governance process around this, and the developer doesn't understand that although Azure App Service is a great managed service, the responsibility to check who is logging in is on the developer.
So it's not like there's like a big pop-up box when you click this checkbox that's like, are you sure you want to do this? This is what it means.
Exactly.
Right?
But is it on Microsoft to be more communicative about this division of responsibility?
It's both. And that's that's the beauty and the complexity of cloud. It's both. There's a shared responsibility. Microsoft provides an amazing service. Azure App Service is amazing, right? But it also comes with great complexity, and we need developers to use it carefully. And also security teams to understand that identity as a service in general, like you get from Azure AD, is an amazing functionality, but it also brings risks.
So for our listeners, what are the main takeaways? If they're hearing the story, if they're equally as shocked by what went down, what should they go and do?
So first of all, I think I'll start from 3 different layers. First of all, it's a simple dev mistake that leads to devastating impact. And that is the story of cloud, right? We need to remember that. That's why it's so important to understand which risks have huge impact. Second is identity as a service, more specifically, is an area that security teams need to be more aware of. And more specifically, if you're using Azure AD, so you have to learn the topic of Azure AD multi-tenant apps and start having a bit more awareness and governance in your organization around it.
Ami, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, and hopefully I'll get more opportunities to join the podcast.
We'll
Do
bring
you
you
do
on
any
again.
more crazy hacks?
I think you passed the test. We're going to bring you again.
Yeah, thank you.
Come with some more good stories next time.
I'm starting to work on it now.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. See you next time.
Thank you.
So thanks to Ami for agreeing to come on and spend time teaching us about the BingBang vulnerability. If our listeners at home would like to learn more about this, where can they go?
Go to the description if you want to read more in the Wiz blog post.
Yeah. We have a bunch of information in the blog post that lets you check whether or not your environment is affected by this. And if you are affected by this, then it has a bunch of suggestions for how you can remediate it. Because basically, like Ami was telling us, every app has to implement authorization within the app itself. So every app is essentially its own story. So there's no like catch-all remediation recommendation here. So we gave a bunch of different options in the blog post. So I really recommend people take a look at that if they want to learn more about this.
If Amitai recommends it, I do too. Awesome. All right, let's go on to our second story of the pod. We have the 3CX supply chain attack, which is where the North Koreans went and they hacked crypto companies.
Yeah.
What happened?
As they do.
As they do, because there is a long now trend of this happening.
Yeah, like North Koreans and cryptocurrency are basically like
Best friends.
Yeah, and it's become like a word association. Like you think of crypto and you think of North Koreans.
Yeah.
And probably the other way around as well. So basically, CrowdStrike and SentinelOne recently released reports on a supply chain attack on a company called 3CX, which is a VoIP software company, kind of like Zoom, like they do like voice calling over your computer, over the internet. And the attacker basically gained access to their network somehow. The details aren't really available yet. And they Trojanized the desktop application for both Windows and Mac.
Trojanized is the word of the day.
Yes.
And they took regular applications, turned them into Trojan horses.
Yes, that's the meaning of Trojanized.
Cool.
Again, if we were like Sesame Street, then we'd have like a big like T, right? Brought to you by the letter T, and then Trojanized. So basically...
Unfortunately, this isn't Sesame Street. This is a cloud security podcast.
Although we have a similar audience, I think, right?
Definitely. Large overlap.
Yeah.
Okay, so what happened? What did CrowdStrike and SentinelOne figure out was happening?
So basically this started kind of interestingly. Like there were just a bunch of their EDR users, like they're both EDR companies, and a bunch of their users sort of started seeing alerts, like completely generic alerts on the 3CX application, basically saying this is behaving like malware, which is weird. Like at first you'd probably dismiss this and think it was a false positive, but you know, as the amount of the customer reports began to grow, these companies started looking into it and they realized that this is actually malware, which is always a bad thing because that means that, you know, typically you'd think, okay, maybe someone downloaded, you know, a weird version of this from some sketchy website, but no, like this is actually people installing from the source. You know, this is the official version, and more than that, it was also signed. Like the binary was actually signed by 3CX's actual certificate, which means that, you know, someone definitely got into their network, or you know, maybe they paid someone off to steal the certificate. But basically, this means that someone was definitely doing something bad to 3CX.
And not only were they doing something bad, they were doing it in a very highly targeted manner.
Yeah.
So like of everyone that was a 3CX customer, only a small number of organizations actually received the second stage malware.
Yeah.
And they all happen to be cryptocurrency companies. And I guess my question is, we joked about the North Korean NFTs, but actually, like, how do we know it was the North Koreans, and why would they be doing this?
So to the question of why, so North Korea is, this is more like a geopolitical conversation, but North Korea is highly isolated. North Korea makes quite a bit of money off cryptocurrency. It was a real boon, I think, to their internal economy. The fact that cryptocurrency basically allows anonymized transactions of money. And they make a lot of money from stealing crypto. A lot of the operations published over the past few years where crypto was stolen has been attributed retroactively to North Korean actors. In this case, the reason we know, or the reason that the researchers think that we can attribute this to North Korea is that Kaspersky, which is another company that looked into this, they saw that the second stage, which is like the malware that's installed once the attackers decide that you're a worthy target, was something that's been seen before in North Korean ops. Something called GoParam, which is like a Go-based malware, and Apple Juice, which is malware that targets.
And my favorite drink.
Yes. See, you watch Sesame Street, you like Apple Juice. Everything's connected.
So that's their MO of the North Koreans: GoParam and Apple Juice.
Yeah. Well, one of many, right?
But these two that were there, enough to attribute them.
Yeah, so like this plus cryptocurrency makes them a very likely candidate. And there might be more. There might be more to this that hasn't been published yet, because not all the details are out there yet.
So it's still an ongoing story. And there are a lot of unclear aspects, like how the attackers initially gained access and what parts of the network they compromised. But do we have any other details or?
So not really. Like you mentioned, like there's not much detail out there yet. This is, it's a live story, so we'll probably have more details in the weeks to come.
Stay tuned. So what are the takeaways for our listeners on the 3CX attack?
So I'd say that the main takeaways would be that supply chain attacks are still very attractive for threat actors. It's a way to basically have all your eggs in one basket. In terms, when you're an attacker, it basically gives you, the pick of the litter, because everybody who's using a popular application automatically becomes a potential target for you. And in this case, the threat actor didn't manage to stay under the radar, like they were caught by EDR.
Busted.
Yeah, but we still don't know how long they were actually at this. It's possible that this was a very long operation, and maybe their cover was blown once they decided to take a bit more risk. It's possible that they were doing this for a while and before they got caught, and they might be doing this elsewhere, right? Supply chain attacks are always really scary because there's no. It's usually very difficult for the end targets, like the people who receive the second stage, to actually know that they're being targeted by this, unless someone else, unless the attacker makes a mistake or gets caught by EDR, like in this case. And I'm really hoping that there's more information released about this, and this isn't the end of the story, because it'll be really interesting to see how this company got hacked.
Yeah, and so other people can prevent and detect similar activity.
Yeah.
All right, for our third story, we have the Muddy Water Cloud Destructive Operation.
Yeah.
This one's an interesting story.
Very much so, yeah.
There was a little birdie named Microsoft.
The tiniest bird of all.
Yep, haven't heard of them. Just kidding. And they reported a really interesting incident that involved data destruction in a cloud environment. But it's juicier than this.
Is it?
It is. That there was some organization that first had their on-prem network get compromised over a period of several months. So it's a long-term operation that got started. And over this period, the attacker learned like the ins and outs of the network and then found ways to access and then compromise the cloud environment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then what happened was they found a machine that had credentials for an Azure environment, and they used Azure Connect, which is a middleware that is like a syncing mechanism between on-prem machines and cloud environments, just so we're all on the same page. And they hijacked this syncing mechanism hijacked it, they stole credentials for the middleware to breach this cloud environment, and then they just started, they did a little bit of reconnaissance, and then they destroyed the network.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
And deleted a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, and at the same time, they deployed ransomware in the on-prem network. So this was like a two-pronged attack, right? Like they destroyed the on-prem, they destroyed the cloud, all at the same time, all to create like a big bad mess all over the place, and send a message that that they had breached this network.
I was here. What exactly, like, who did this? Do we know who did this?
So yeah, so in this case, Microsoft is attributed to an actor they call Mercury, also known as Muddy Water, who has been previously attributed by the US government to the Iranian intelligence. And another actor involved here that is probably also connected to Iranian actors. Another actor involved in this called Darkbit, which is a ransomware actor who gained notoriety a few months ago for attacking the Technion, which is an Israeli university.
And this is how the next season of Tehran came to be, which is a TV show about the fight between the Israelis and the Iranians.
Yeah,
So.
I don't watch it, but I've heard good things.
It's a good
Should I
show.
watch it?
I like it.
Okay.
Big fan. Okay. So I learned something very cool from Amitai recently when we were having discussions about Muddy Water, which was about attribution. And I was saying to him, like, how does one confidently attribute something like this to this Iranian,
Right.
group and whatnot? So can you tell our listeners what you told me about how attribution works?
Sure. So I think the best way to talk about it would be to split it into two steps. The first step that you talk about is clustering. So clustering is basically saying, without trying to figure out who is behind something, just trying to figure out which operations were conducted by the same actor. So like it's like you have like a serial killer, and before you figure out that you have a serial killer, you just have a bunch of murders, right?
Yeah.
And then you start to see patterns. You start to say, okay, this murder happened in the same area as this murder, and the weapon was similar, and they left a similar, I don't know, a present on the bed or something, and I don't know, and too many cop shows, and the victim was similar, or they had a connection between them, and then you say, okay, maybe these two crimes are connected, right? So you can do the same thing in cyber. You can say, these two different ops were on networks that were in the same industry, and the attacker used similar tools, or they were communicating with their tools from the same server. And then you start to say, okay, the person who did this is the same person who did this. That's clustering.
Got it.
The second stage is what we normally call attribution, which is saying, not only do I know that all these ops were conducted by the same person or group, I can also confidently, or more or less confidently say, this is who was behind it. This is the perp.
Yeah.
And that is a lot more difficult. There are ways to do it, based on intelligence, for example. Like if you are an intelligence agency, like I don't know, the NSA or CIA, you can basically gather intelligence from all your sources and reach the conclusion based on this that, whoever did this op is actually Iran or Russia or China or whatever. Sometimes even getting to the point where you can say like it's a specific person or a specific organization on the other side.
What should you do to protect your cloud environment against this type of attack?
So if you are the type of person or organization who is concerned that either the Iranians or someone else will do something similar to your environment, first of all, I'd say that protecting lateral movement from an on-prem environment to a cloud environment is hard, because at the end of the day, you have to have people working on-prem in the real world using laptops and whatnot to connect to cloud environments. And if their on-prem hardware gets hacked, then you're going to have a bad day. There is stuff you can do to protect against this. You can use MFA, but if they connect using RDP, like if they literally connect to the machine and from there connect to the cloud environment, there's not much you can do against that, right? So you have to focus on detection. But I will say that you can make it harder for attackers by making sure your secrets are well protected, especially those that allow lateral movement to the cloud. You should make sure that secrets are not long-lived, and at the end of the day, you can, if you're concerned about destructive attacks, as maybe you should be, you can also make sure that you have good backups, long-term backups.
I hope these guys had good backups.
Yeah, I also hope so. Otherwise, they would have had a very, very bad day, maybe if not a bad year. And as always, make it harder for threat actors to get into your environment in the first place, right? Like, have good patching mechanisms in place. Make sure you search for misconfigured apps, and always focus on public-facing stuff.
All right. Wonderful. Not wonderful for.
As I mentioned, this is no laughing matter. No laughing matter. No jokes. No jokes allowed on the podcast.
I can still try, but.
Okay.
For our fourth story, we have our CVE of the pod, the QueueJumper.
We need like a theme music now.
Yeah.
Like a.
Background music.
Da-da-da-da-da-da.
I always feel inclined to read out the CVE number, like for the drama. CVE 2023 21554.
I think last time we did like a rap song.
We did.
What are we gonna do this time?
I just
a
announced
dance.
it. I just announced it. I feel like I did it.
Fun.
Been there, done that. The TLDR of what went down with the CVE.
Could I get like a graphic, like here with the CVE? Would that be complicated?
If it's a temporary tattoo, we should have them handed out at the office.
Yeah.
Here's the temporary tattoo CV of the week.
There would be so many.
Yeah. Anyways, the TLDR of what happened is that Check Point found a Windows RCE vulnerability such that anyone on the internet, or shall I say to be official, any unauthenticated attackers, can run code on your machine so long that a specific built-in service in Windows was activated and a specific port was open.
Right.
Which service was it that this affected?
So this affected a service called MSMQ, which is sort of like a legacy, very, very old service in Windows, short for Microsoft Message Queuing, which basically just allows applications to talk to each other. This exists on both desktop and Windows servers, and it also has to be enabled for a bunch of different stuff to run, including like really popular applications. So it's not enabled by default, so you won't necessarily find this on.
It's a checkbox.
Yeah, it is a checkbox. It is literally a checkbox.
Tell you to check out.
And there are ways to check whether it's installed on your machine or not. It's pretty simple.
It's important to note that this was not a 0-day vulnerability, but after it was published, people did try and exploit it. We don't know if any attackers used it beforehand. Right. But Check Point did find that over 360,000 servers on the internet have the relevant port open and run the MSMQ service.
Yeah, so that's like a pretty wide attack surface. So like to begin with, it's possible that has shrunk since then because this was like before Patch Tuesday, and since then
maybe everyone took care of it.
Maybe in a perfect world, doesn't exist anymore. Everybody's patched. I don't think so.
You can go home. You don't have a job anymore.
Yeah, I'm done. But yeah, like it seems like this would be pretty simple for attackers to exploit, because basically all they have to do is like craft a packet, send this on the right port. If the target machine happens to have the service running, then
Boom.
They're in. But Check Point haven't released that much technical details about this yet because they don't want attackers to use that against innocent victims. Or again, maybe, or even non-innocent victims. Like, I don't want to bias against anyone, but it seems like this is going to be pretty simple, and this is definitely something that you should patch.
So the takeaway is patch as soon as possible.
Yeah, but since this does have like the two prerequisites of you have to have the service enabled and you have to have the port open. Yeah, so you can prioritize a pretty small area of your network that has this stuff, has the right conditions.
Yeah, and prioritize, as we usually say, the publicly exposed servers rather than the internal servers, which can be lower on your to-do list.
So like in theory, if an attacker gains access to your network using some other method, some other vulnerability or misconfiguration or whatever, they can still use this vulnerability if it exists on like an internal server elsewhere to move laterally to it and then escalate their privileges and take over your environment. So eventually this should be patched everywhere because it's probably very easy to exploit. But for now, if you're concerned about this, you should be focusing, like you said, on the publicly exposed side.
All right, we did it. We went through our 4 stories of the day.
The month.
Of the month. Yeah, the day and the month. Let's do a quick recap of everything we covered and what your takeaways should be.
Let's do it.
Our first story with Ami, BingBang. What are the takeaways?
So I think the best takeaway for this should be check out our blog post, check out Microsoft advisory on this. They're in the description.
Read.
Yep. Read or use a screen reader.
Nice. Use blue light glasses. For our second story, we went over the 3CX supply chain attack.
Yeah, and if you are concerned that you were targeted by this, then look for IOCs, check if you've been infected. If you're a 3CX user, then obviously you should be more concerned than if you're not. If you're a crypto company, you should be more concerned than if you're not. And stay tuned for more information. I hope we cover this on the next episode, and by the next episode, we'll have hopefully more information to share.
Fingers crossed. And for our third story was the Iranian cloud destruction operation.
Yeah, which was really interesting. And again, similar to the previous item, look for IOCs, make sure your secrets are secure, and make it harder for threat actors to leverage them for lateral movement.
And lastly, for QueueJumper, our CVE, what's the takeaway?
The jokeless CVE.
Unless you ask ChatGPT.
Yeah. So again, focus on publicly exposed Windows servers with MSMQ enabled, and port 1801 open, and patch them with haste.
With haste. And that's all for this episode of Crying Out Cloud, presented by the cloud security company Wiz. Wiz! By the way, we wanted to share that we just released a new monthly newsletter that covers all the latest cloud security news. So if that sounds interesting to you, which it should. You can subscribe to that as well at bit.ly/cryingoutcloud. If you did enjoy the show, which we sincerely hope you did, or if you just enjoyed listening to Ami, be sure to subscribe and give us a rating. And remember, unlike your IAM policies, more stars is better. And as always, if your cloud security strategy is making you cry, don't worry, just cry out cloud. Thank you.